sorry to say the truth, oh, when it's crushing. And I'm sorry to say that I'm a human, willing to start again. And you say today doesn't matter, and you can't go on like this. And I see your heart broken and tattered every time I tell you the truth. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you all for coming out tonight. This is an amazing turnout. I couldn't be happier. I see so many mostly familiar faces because you all know me and that's why you're here. And I appreciate that. I couldn't have made this podcast without you guys. It just wouldn't have happened if not for inspiration or actual interviews that you were gracious enough to do with me. I also have a ton of people in the audience who were participants in some of the sillier parts of the podcast itself, and so I appreciate you guys for being game when I say, hey, do you want to go look at this thing? And you say, yeah, let's go look at this thing. And so thank you to all of my friends, family, and community members for supporting this project all these years. I thank you, thank you, thank you a million times over. Thank you. So for anyone who doesn't know, I'm Gail Golec, and I am the creator and the writer, producer, editor of the Secret Life of Death podcast. And the podcast itself, again, if you are unfamiliar, usually I do history podcasts about long ago history, and usually having to do with cemeteries. That's sort of been the gig with the podcast up until this particular series, which I called called Identity. And this one ended up being 3 parts, and then it was 4 parts, and then it was 5, and then it was 6 when all was said and done, talking about the history of Andrews Inn here in Bellows Falls, Vermont. And again, some of you may have listened to the first 5 episodes, which are out, which you can either find on my website, the Secret Life of Death podcast, or if you have another podcast platform you like, you can find it on there too. But a little synopsis of the first 5 episodes, they take you through the history of not only the inn itself, but also the town of Bellows Falls. As I was doing the research into this, Bellows Falls kind of became another character in this. And so I thought it was really going to be useful to learn more about Bellows Falls, to understand the how, where, when, and why of the 1970s and 80s of this town, how this amazing gay bar got to be established and flourish for the time that it was here. And so that's what the podcast walks you through. And so tonight what we're doing is we have the 6th episode, which hasn't been released yet, and that's the conclusion, essentially, of what we've learned so far in podcast land, if you will. And that takes us into the modern era. So we started in the 70s, went into the 80s throughout all the first 5 episodes. Today we're going to explore the modern times, explore the legacy of Andrews Inn. And so that's where we're going to pick up on the podcast right now. And so for the next 45 minutes, just be prepared to have your mind blown. So. And after that's done, we'll do a Q&A. If anybody has any comments or questions, anything, I'll get back up here and we can talk. And this is a really open, safe environment. Anybody who has anything they'd like to share, please feel free. Or if you don't want to, not a problem either. We'll do the raffle after all is said and done. And again, there'll be snacks, drinks, and things like that if you care to partake. Bathrooms are down that little hallway there with the small sliding door. If anybody needs it at any point, you're not gonna, this is taped, so you're not gonna interrupt anybody, performing at that. So if you need to go ahead. And I think cell phones, if you haven't already, please mute them and enjoy. When we left off on part 5 of our Identity series, we had just come to 1982. That year, HIV/AIDS had just become a part of the public conversation. And Andrews Inn had been raided by federal authorities for supposedly facilitating illegal sex work, which we later learned was a setup by local police and the feds. The combination of those two things resulted in a reduction in the clientele for the inn, and as a result, a dropping revenue stream. The inn limped along before finally closing its doors for good in April of 1984. And for 40 years, no one really talked all that much about Andrews Inn. But its history and legacy hovered in the local consciousness. So, all these years later, and we're just beginning to reflect on that legacy and appreciate Andrews Inn's influence on the local community in general and the LGBTQ+ community in particular. It's only now that we've begun to hold space for the full story here and fill in the gaps for that story and for so many others. Finally, allowing us to answer the question we've been asking for the past 100 years in Bellows Falls. Who are we in this town? I'm Gail Golec, and this is The Secret Life of Death, Episode 8, Identity, Part 6. So I don't know, do we want to...
Would you read it to us?
Or do you want us to read it? Or, yeah.
Take turns reading it?
Yeah.
I also find it interesting.
Naked. Okay.
Oh,
Yep.
hello.
Some naked. There's some wieners. Okay.
Okay.
You may recall from part 3 of episode 8, in the summer of 2020, I rallied some friends together, including John Madura, Michael Bruno, Adam Gearhart, and Kate Buckman, to chat, drink wine, and look at a vintage 1970s gay porno mag. I really had to twist some arms on that one. And beyond the joy of being communal country perverts...
It's so funny. It's called... What's the tagline? Just lifestyle for men?
The national magazine about men.
About men.
Which is so, it's true.
Okay.
It's
It's
technically
like men's
true.
health.
Yeah.
Illustrative.
Oh, look at that.
Is that the
What is
Elks
it?
Lodge? Or
Oh
the
my
Messiah
God, they
Temple?
show Bellows Falls.
That looks familiar.
Is Bellows Falls.
The magazine, Blue Boy, was actually legitimate research material. But isn't it always? Okay, I'll stop that now. Blue Boy, being the equivalent of a gay Playboy, had good articles. And in the April 1979 issue, they did a piece about Andrews Inn and how Bellows Falls just might be a nice, affordable, accepting place for gay people to live. I was hoping it would be fun to read the article for the first time with the gang. And it was. Gold diggers. Oh, there's stuff popping out all over the place.
A turtleneck with no pants.
It's a bold statement.
You gotta get coverage somewhere. Go up the neck.
So
take
when
the
he's
pants
working
off.
on his motorcycle. It also has something that a New England town forefathers probably didn't plan for. A lot of gay people.
Hallelujah.
With a permanent population of about 3,800, one would expect Bellows... But while reading that article together, I was hoping to capture some of their reflections and experiences on living in Bellows Falls today as out gay men, all of whom had moved here from elsewhere. That's not including me or Kate, we're local gals. After the hilarity of reading the ads for mesh pants subsided, we had a very interesting conversation about being out and living in Bellows Falls today. The order of speaking in this part of the conversation is Michael Bruno, me, John Madura, Kate Buckman, and then Adam Gearhart.
I do feel like the Andrews Inn has kind of shaped the community as far as acceptance goes. I mean, just talking to people who've grown up here, they grew up with that being part of the town, and I mean, gay people weren't really an outside thing, so it's really interesting.
So maybe for the generation after that, like, just even had the idea of gay people being part of a community, not just one here, one there, and they kind of...
It wasn't an abstract concept for people in the area.
I mean, when I was starting to come here almost 15 years ago, I was kind of welcomed by people letting me know that they're okay with it, so I think the Andrews Inn did have a portion or part to do with that.
And for me, I'm glad that there were trailblazers, because that was certainly not me.
But I think it's interesting that, like, I didn't know that Andrews Inn existed at all. I mean, admittedly, when it was a thing, I was like, what, 4? But at the same time, I think you're probably right about it shaped the community in general a little bit. But it's funny that, like, we're not that far from Bellows Falls here, and I had no idea. And I asked my mom, and she was like, I've never heard of it.
And I think that's interesting too, where even if you don't know specifically, but you know, just the ripple effects of, you know, just the type of people, first, the type of area that it was to begin with, that people like came here and did it and felt comfortable. But then, you know, just because we're all so connected, whether like, you know, your next door neighbor or the people 3 doors down, you know them through someone. And like, if you have this experience with someone and you think, oh no, they're fine people, and it's like those values carry on, right? And so whether you were directly tied to it, you were probably like, the area was influenced by it.
And it's also hard to be anonymous with such a small population.
Yeah, sure.
It's not like you just disappear into, you know, an alley in a city. You kind of have to see everybody the next day. Literally on the street. I can't imagine a world where I couldn't have that attitude, and I would be a very bitter, angry person if there wasn't some level of acceptance, because it's hard enough, even with a large circle of friends and a fairly accepting community, because everywhere you go, you travel outside of your little bubble, and, you know, it might as well be 1840 in some places.
But you guys all sort of feel like moving to Bellows Falls was made somewhat easier by having had that community there before you.
Yeah. It seems like it's all built on that over time. I mean, if you look at some of the people who moved here earlier and did stuff in town, there are connections to the Andrews Inn.
Yeah, and I have to say, I probably feel more accepted and more comfortable here than I did in Long Island.
Oh.
You know, even though it's closer to the city and there's a higher population, but I felt more physically threatened to be myself there than I ever did up here.
Yeah, I have to agree with that.
In a way, I think probably, like, each of us could probably trace our lineage to here, and like, oh, you came here because who came before you, and I came here because of you. Like, almost like you can trace why it's here, and you get back to it. And I think Andrews Inn was probably a big factor.
It's like family roots.
Yeah.
But through a circle of friends rather than actual blood.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is interesting, though. I guess I never really thought about tracing the lineage of how people ended up here and who came before them. And
I'm still amazed that I ended up moving to Bellows Falls and didn't know any of this.
So you really didn't know? Really?
I didn't either.
Huh.
Just that, you know, I had a few friends that, you know, were family and told me it was, you know, a fairly safe area, but
So it really does
I had no
have
idea the history.
a legacy outside of just this area as...
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. It just seemed very inviting, I guess, when you talk to people.
But do you even know, like, so, I mean, you were passing through...
I don't know how I ended up
but
here.
did Matt, like, was he, like...
We had no
Why
connection
here?
here.
Yeah, not even
Zero
him.
connection. We pulled off to get gas once, and we got like a real estate magazine out of a gas station or something. And just going around the downtown, seeing stuff that was going on. They were redoing the Exner Block sidewalks and stuff, and the rundown historic buildings and everything are kind of really intrigued me. But then again, just talking about, you know, how one thing leads to another. I mean, seeing those renovations, I know a lot of them had to do with Robert McBride, and I know he had a connection to the Andrews Inn. And then also, I mean, I had no plans on moving here originally, but the neighbors were so inviting, and I mean, I was afraid originally the first time to let them know, but obviously anybody who talks to me will know. And they're like, oh, well, you know, aren't you sad that you can't be with your partner this weekend or whatever? And I mean, they stretched out. And I mean, so many of the neighbors went out of their way to make me feel comfortable. So, I don't know.
On Atkinson Street?
On Atkinson Street, yeah.
Yeah, and then I only found out about the town because of you, because we were
You were
neighbors in New
visiting.
York, and you know, I had contemplated Vermont because I just loved the scenery, but I knew nothing about any of the areas or what there would be for me job-wise or anything. I just found it appealing.
Yeah.
Wow.
I don't know. But yeah, I guess
There must be something
I never
about
really
just,
thought
like,
about that,
a
but like every
vibe.
little thing kind of builds on
Yeah.
itself.
Every little thing does build on itself. And Michael would know. He has invested a lot in Bellows Falls since moving here all those years ago. He owns the Windham Antique Center in the downtown square. And along with a number of independent shops and businesses, there's a jewelry store, a flower shop, a couple of cafes, a coffee roaster, a couple of bookstores, a paper conservator, a gym, a hardware and outdoor goods store, the Opera House, which operates as a movie theater and performance space, a free live music venue, a number of bars, a pizza place, an independent radio station, several clothing stores, and an artists' co-op. The downtown continues to build off of the revitalization projects that were started in the 1970s with the town's Bicentennial Committee, and later with the Rockingham Arts and Museum Project, or RAMP, which renovated another large building in the downtown and rents affordable studio spaces to artists and craftspeople. As for the Hotel Windham building, well, other than its 3 shop spaces, the building was more or less vacant until 2005, when it was purchased by the Windham Development Group. They undertook extensive renovations, making the building more energy efficient and code compliant. And then, bringing our story full circle, they opened Popolo in 2012, a nice sit-down restaurant in the same space that housed Andrews Inn. Once again, helping to light up the downtown. And in another full circle moment...
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Ooh. In 2018. Wow, you guys have been busy.
Yeah.
36 years after couple Tom Herman and Jeremy Yost closed Andrews Inn, another sit-down restaurant, co-owned and run by a couple, opened here in the downtown.
Hi, my name is Alain Martinez. I am co-owner of Wonder Bar Bellows Falls.
Yeah, and my name's Remy Walker. I'm also co-owner of Wonder Bar.
I met with Alain and Remy in July of 2021 to chat about their experience of finding Bellows Falls and opening a restaurant and bar here. Standing in the dining area of Wunderbar, they walked me through the renovations they had undertaken during COVID that were just wrapping up.
And it's kind of all just come together now quite recently, well, quickly I should say, because we were delayed for so long because of COVID, materials, and we're still waiting on furniture. We thought this would be a good time to renovate. Nope. Yeah. Not the case.
Everybody else's idea too, I think, which is the problem.
Yeah.
So, in getting to know Aline and Remy, it helps to know what their creation, Wunderbar, is all about.
So, talking about Wunderbar and what Wunderbar is, or at least what I like to think it is, and it's a fun restaurant with a killer cocktail program and great craft beer. The food is seasonal. We do work with a lot of local producers, so we're kind of tied to what nature can give us based on our location for most of the things. I think our flavors and the type of food we do is very eclectic. We both come from diverse backgrounds, and we like different foods from different places and different cultures, so we like to harmonize those flavors with local ingredients and kind of bring them together. And it's a very welcoming space for everyone who just wants to enjoy good food with good company.
Yeah, I think that was, I was trying to articulate that. I think to piggyback, we welcome all kinds of people, all walks of life. We want to be a place where anyone feels comfortable and welcome.
And as with so many people who have moved to Bellows Falls, going back to the Andrews Inn days, Aline and Remy were first brought to the area while visiting a friend.
And at that point in our life, we were tired of Miami. We were looking for a change. Vermont wasn't on the list of places we were considering, of course. But she knew we were looking for a change, and she invited us to come up here and check it out and see if we would like it in Vermont.
Because she adamantly said we would. I mean, I would like to say that she definitely was a big part of why we ended up in Vermont as a whole.
Yes, and we trust her opinion for a lot of things, so we figured why not give it a shot, and we came up for a couple weeks and we really liked it.
We loved it. I will honestly say, as cliche and cheesy as it sounds, for me it was almost like within the first moments. So I'm very intuitive and I feel a lot of things. I have a lot of emotions. Right away, I feel that, and I say it all the time, I'm a big proponent of Vermont. I try to sell Vermont all the time. I try to get people to come here and experience it because I fundamentally think Vermont is a very magical place. For me, energetically, just that first day walking around, taking deep breaths, looking around, I almost instantly was like, I think Remy was too, we both were. We're instantly just like, wow, it's amazing here. And it was, without knowing it until we were here, it was almost kind of exactly what we were looking for. A simpler, slower paced, surrounded by nature.
Yeah. I'm just going to say, I think it's ironic that we wanted something slower and then we opened a restaurant.
Yes. Well, things always work out. Yeah. It's true.
And as the two settled on Vermont, they soon found just the right town. To be sure, as the new kids on the playground, they got an earful of local gossip about their new hometown.
It was really interesting how things played out because we made that decision, in all honesty, not knowing much of the history of Bellows Falls. And then as we started to kind of talk about Bellows Falls, we actually did get, I won't say negative, but for lack of a better, there was a lot of like, oh, Bellows Falls. Yeah. Oh, why Bellows Falls?
Especially from people around the area, like Walpole, Brattleboro.
The bad history or the negative, or it went through a really bad patch. And it was just very interesting for Remy and I because I feel that a lot of that negativity made us really love Bellows Falls even more. In a way, because once we were then privy to that information, we did our own research and we did our own kind of, reading up on, and I really appreciated its rich history. I don't see it as a negative. I think it was, it brought us present-day Bellows Falls, which is a great place.
And though Aline and Remy heard many stories of Bellows Falls and were told of the history of things like the railroad and the mills, they had no idea about the amazing LGBTQ+ history that had happened right across the square from the Wonder Bar.
We found that out after already having bought the building and being in the community.
Yeah.
We found that out after the fact, which was yet another reason why we loved. I mean, we instantly were like, wow, how cool is that? Like, how great is that?
Yeah, we almost took it as like a...
Yeah, for us it was yet another sign.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of things for us in our experience happened organically and naturally. And yeah, I would agree. That was definitely one sign that was like, okay, we're picking something up. We're continuing a torch.
And though that torch had been passed to the next generation, the man who founded Andrews Inn as a gay bar in the 1970s, John Moises, lived long enough to see what Aline and Remy had done at Wonder Bar.
We met John Moises. He came in a couple times. He was a character.
Wait, who's John Moses?
He would always had this like big fur coat.
Oh!
I think it was like
that was
Beaver or
John?
something. Yeah.
With the fabulous rings.
Yeah, all the jewelry.
Oh, we loved John.
Yeah.
Oh my
I
God.
think he was living in in Springfield. Yeah, he passed.
He did pass.
Recently.
Yeah, that's true. He was enthusiastic fan of Wonder Bar. Every time he came in, and now that I put it, he was very much like, it's just so fabulous, and he was fabulous in his big fur. Yeah, he was great.
The parallels between Andrews Inn and Wonder Bar are almost too many to count, made all the more fantastic by the fact that they seemingly came together by sheer coincidence. But there are some differences between the two restaurants, particularly when it came to their reception by the town.
I will say for us, our experience from the beginning we got here, the community has really been very sweet and kind and embracing to us.
Yeah.
You know, I think people really appreciate what we do and what we bring to the community, and I think people enjoy themselves here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think people feel safe here.
A restaurant and bar providing a safe place for all people to gather in Bellows Falls, and the town being very welcoming of a business owned by an LGBTQ+ couple. There's something to be said for history repeating itself, albeit not exactly in the same way. And there's something to be said about having time to reflect on our past, taking advantage of that space to see and talk about things that perhaps we weren't ready or able to before. And difficult as it may be, it's ultimately good for us, that catharsis. And in all the years of struggle and woe, that's a lesson Bellows Falls has started to take to heart.
This is the story of the Star Hotel fire, the night of December 29th, 1981, and the days following, as told by the people who were there. Bellows Falls, Vermont is a small village.
In 2021, the local community television station, Fact 8 TV, produced a documentary called To Duty, the story of Terry Brown and Dana Fuller, two local firefighters who were killed in the fire at the Star Hotel. In the documentary, Fact 8 staff Mike Smith and Marty Gallagher interviewed a total of 17 people about their memories. Firefighters who were on the scene that night, as well as friends and family members of Terry Brown and Dana Fuller.
Scampering around and, trying to do this and do that. And I'm sure that Terry and Dana came during this confusion and, went in and do it. In the building, they let a wall collapse. I remember that.
2021 marked the 40-year anniversary of that fire. And in addition to the documentary, funds were raised to create an official commemorative park on the site where the Star Hotel once stood. When completed, the park will not only honor the fallen men, but also inform a new generation of townspeople of what happened on that site.
What Terry and Dana did was heroic, and what Steve and Brent did was heroic. And we don't want to forget that. We want to remember what did happen here in town. It was part of the town culture. There were so many people that when you say, "Where were you at the Star Hotel?" They'll know immediately. However, there's so many people that have been born since then or have moved here since then that in a way it almost is a part of the local culture that they're not familiar with. To me, it was a story that wasn't really explained well. So part of this is not just to memorialize them, but to tell the story.
As you may recall from part 3 of this series, the Star Hotel was located right next to the Hotel Windham building, where, in 1981, Andrews Inn was then operating. They had a front row seat to the fire that night, and as the scale of the fire intensified, the inn opened its doors to the exhausted firemen, provided food, coffee, and a place to sit and catch their breath.
Went on forever. The Andrews Inn people were very good. Now, this is sort of an aside to it, but they were making up coffee to take out to the firemen, and even
This frightening and terribly sad thing happened right in the inn's dooryard. It was witnessed by Tom Herman, Jeremy Yost, the inn's staff and patrons, and they all helped in whatever way they could. The events of that night impacted them, and they were very much a part of the story of what happened on that December night in 1981. And some 40 years later, their memories were finally added to the legend of the Star Hotel fire. Jeremy was interviewed by the documentary crew, and he provided a number of photos he had taken of the fire, which helped document the fire's timeline and were later used in the movie.
I remember I took a break and came back down, and there was Tom was out front with coffee already, with a tray serving coffee to people. And, when we had staff working, making things here, and they also could come in and just, firemen could come in and just, literally get a breather.
And when the documentary premiered at the Bellows Falls Opera House in September of 2021, Jeremy was invited to attend. Fully aware of the associations many in town had to him, Tom, and the inn 40 years ago, Jeremy went, not knowing what kind of reception he would get. Here's Jeremy reflecting on that experience during my interview with him and Tom.
Because what I noticed when I was at the filming was that felt to me like it was a sort of second-handed attempt to ameliorate some of the black eye-ness, because how many people, and you weren't there, but how many of the firemen came up and personally thanked me.
Yeah. I think I would have been in tears if I had been there with you.
It was amazing.
Yeah,
it was amazing. It's like the first time when you said exonerated, that's the word that came to my mind. I left that place, that theater, feeling like, wow, I did not expect that. To have Gaetano come up and give me a hug, and say, gosh, thank you so much. You guys are an integral part of this whole. I'm like, what? How many years, decades later?
It is interesting what we see when we revisit old things with new insight. We get understanding and perspective. Perhaps see where we fell short back then and where there's a need to right an old wrong. It's rare we humans ever have the patience and humility to do the right thing the second time around. Rare, but not unheard of. Oh my goodness. Over these 6 shows, we've covered quite a bit of territory. Literally. We've hiked up a mountain, walked down Main Street, skulked around the hallways and basement bar in an old hotel. We've heard stories and relived a lot of old memories about queer costume balls, hotel party weekends, biker clubs, historical lesbians, and vintage gay porn. We've witnessed the growth, breakdown, and rebirth of an old New England mill town, posed existential questions to friends, partaken in community gossip, remembered and grieved for family members long gone. It hasn't always been a polite or comfortable conversation, but holy shit, has it been informative. I know I learned a lot. Some of it really surprised me, and some of it, sadly, did not. At the beginning of this series, I set out to tell the tale about the clash of cultures at a pivotal point in our local history. And I think this story about Andrews Inn, the first openly gay bar and hotel in the state of Vermont, coming into its own during the gay rights movement of the 1970s and 80s, amongst the backdrop of an old-fashioned, traditional New England mill town, checked those boxes, yes? We took a deep historical dive into the stories of the LGBTQ+ and the local Bellows Falls communities, and discovered 2 groups of people who seemingly couldn't have been more different. Queer and straight, liberal and conservative, modern and traditional, etc. When their storylines intersected in 1973, it was a moment of transition for both groups. The LGBTQ+ community on the precipice of living a more visible, out lifestyle, and the local Bellows Falls residents trying to overcome years of stagnation and decline with a plan of recreating some of the town's past glory. Over the next 10 years, their worlds at times ran parallel, coexisting in a wary truce, at times intertwined in periods of communal danger and survival, but in the end diverged somewhat by intentional actions and unforeseeable events. Superficially, this is a story of 2 groups who were just so different they could never quite find a way to completely connect and forge a relationship. But as my research into this story went on, I realized that the LGBTQ+ community and the Bellows Falls town residents had more in common than would first appear. Their core motivations were actually the same. They were both searching desperately for a place to belong, to feel safe, have security and pride in their community. They weren't asking for much, only access to what they had long been denied. To have just enough for a simple life and the possibility of a stable future. These were 2 groups of people who had been left behind by the world. Perhaps that's what drew them together in the first place, but it wasn't enough to keep them together. The desire to fulfill our basic human needs is a thread that connects all of us. And while our needs may be the same, the way in which we go about getting those needs met often is not. Our wider, white, straight, cisgendered, patriarchal culture is fueled by this notion that there's not enough to go around, and that when times get tough and people feel threatened, rather than pull together on a plan that can benefit everyone, the reaction should be to remove competition for resources, often by laying waste to those just beneath us on the socioeconomic ladder. And we saw that happen in Bellows Falls. At the height of the town's economic uncertainty, and amid differing views on how the town should remake itself in the 1980s, pursue the traditional mill revitalization model, or shift gears and actively embrace more tourism, there was a controversial raid of sex workers at the inn. That raid played off of people's fears and assumptions about the LGBTQ+ community. It allowed them to scapegoat them for all of society's woes, and it made an example of them by showing what happens to a minority group who doesn't stay in their place. I know, those aren't nice things to hear about your town. But what's worse is that no one's ever really talked about it since it happened. Perhaps that's due to people's embarrassment, associating themselves and the town with sex and sexuality. Maybe it's their own shame, with people reflecting on what they thought about and did to LGBTQ+ people back in the day, or fear of what others would say today if they knew. Or maybe it's about power, maintaining control in the present by controlling the narrative of the past. Either way, here it is, 2023, only 40 years later, and hardly anyone of my generation has ever heard of Andrews Inn, even within the LGBTQ+ community. It's a reminder of how empty spaces are created and how history is lost. These kinds of things happen in all our towns, which is why we need to know our history, all of it. Doing these deep historical dives will uncover things that will sadden and disappoint us. It's understandable to be scared by what we might find when we start digging around in old stories and asking questions. But if we ever want to do things better in this world, we have to know our truth and we have to sit with it. Because avoiding these difficult feelings and ignoring uncomfortable truths does not make them go away. Unspoken things still take up space in our consciousness. And without definition or form, they're allowed to permeate across the generations, creating empty spaces in people's lives, leaving them discontented and disconnected without ever knowing why. Which is why having the context of our stories is so important. With the full breadth of our stories laid bare, we can, for the first time perhaps, begin to clearly see ourselves, our communities, how events affected us and how we affected them. To be able to do all of that can take a change in perspective. And to change our perspective, well, often that takes time.
It's so interesting, and I don't mean to sound too trite, but I'll say it, is that, I was thinking about all the different people who lived in the area, who participated, either worked for us, or were allies, or came to the inn to be part of their community and the extended community. And it really seems to me like you have a battle in this town between fear and love. Right. That simple.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, that's, if you could put the emotion on that dichotomy, I think you're absolutely right. Because they were amazing miracles. I think there was a higher force directing and steering this thing. In just that,
got us in, got us to do what we did, and got us out.
And got us out. Yeah. This was our world. So we brought the I'm happy that we brought the values to that, to create an environment that was with the intention of having the most benefit for the most people. Okay, you're straight.
There were many moments that I thought, oh my goodness, this is just, I can't tolerate it. It's too much. And there are many moments of very sweet interaction of the different worlds, and that's what I treasure.
For Jeremy Yost and Tom Herman and the people of Bellows Falls, this new perspective can't change the past, but it can change hearts.
He contacted me on Facebook, and I don't really even recall what I did for him, but he does, and he just reached out to thank me.
We were in so many ways just pawns of these larger forces, some good, some bad, that at least that's some of what I felt. But I will always, I will sleep well at night and be, when I'm passing through the pearly gates, be very happy that we made a difference. I walked out of that theater.
Well, for you, it must have felt like an apology of sorts.
It did.
And an understanding.
It totally
which
did.
I'm so glad you had.
Yeah, no, it was a total apology. It was like, oh my God. And that allowed me to look at it through a lens that I hadn't really looked at it. And it's like, whoa, we kind of did something.
We should all be so lucky to be able to look back on our lives and feel we've done something and made a difference. That's a nice way to end this story. But before we go, I want to go back to the question I posed at the beginning of this series. Is the story of who we think we are the same as the story of who we really are? And yeah, in the context of this show about gay culture, we can take that literally, that some are in the closet about their sexuality. But I think you've realized by now that I used this as a backdrop to ask that question more broadly. Because if we are honest, most of us hide our true selves and the truth of ourselves. The truth about the things we've inherited, the truth about the things we've done, the truth about what we've allowed ourselves to become. It's hard to admit that maybe we aren't who we thought, aren't even who we want to be, and maybe never were. Well, shit, that's bleak. But it's only at this point, when we've shaken off the old stories and gained a full understanding of the sequence of our past, the reasons for our present, do we have hope for the future. And it's only when we've let go of those stories of who and what we were, do we get to decide who and what we want to be. And I'm just going to throw this out there. Why not try to be kind? At its best, kindness can make someone's day better, someone's life better. At its worst, it's neutral, no harm done. And if we try to come at things in this life with kindness, we have space to grow, to learn, to get things wrong, but then make it right. Kindness costs us nothing, but it has the potential for immense social and spiritual good. Admirable ideals upon which to define an identity. Special thanks for this episode go to interviewees Michael Bruno, John Madura, Adam Gearhart, Kate Buckman, Aline Martinez, Remy Walker, Jeremy Yost, and Tom Herman. To Mike Smith and the crew at Fact 8 TV in Bellows Falls, Vermont, for their permission to use clips of their documentary Called to Duty, the story of Dana Fuller and Terry Brown. If you're interested in watching the full documentary, you can find it on YouTube, Fact 8 TV, or find these links in the show notes of this episode. Transcripts are provided in the show notes on the episode page on our website, thesecretlifeofdeath.com. We'd love to hear any memories of stories from Andrew's Inn from back in the day, especially from those in the BIPOC communities or any female folks. Email us at admin@thesecretlifeofdeath.com. Music provided with permission by Epidemic Sound. For more information about this podcast, weekly posts, and fun extras, find us on Instagram and Facebook at The Secret Life of Death Podcast. You can download our shows from our website or find them on any podcast platform. Please subscribe, rate the show, and tell a friend. It really helps. Thank you all so much. Thank you. And nobody fell asleep. I think you all deserve a round of applause for that. That was good. At this point, are there any comments, any questions? We can start a dialogue about anything. If there's anything from any of the previous episodes that you had questions about, or a comment on, or yeah, feel free to jump right in there, or not, or if you really got to go to the bathroom. Yes, back in the corner there. That's the subject was something I've been thinking about this as a topic for a really long time. I'm an archaeologist and historian by training, and so usually when I'm doing my work, I'm learning about things 100, 200, 5,000 years ago, and very rarely do you get the opportunity in that line of work to actually work on a project that happened in your neighborhood. So that was something that was really exciting for me. And also something that happened during my lifetime that's also a little bit unusual. So it was something that I didn't really know anything about either. And I go through this a little bit more in the other episodes, but that's kind of the thread, a very common thread, talking to all the people that I talked to. Like, yeah, they kind of knew about the inn. They had a vague idea where it was, when it was, what happened there. But there wasn't not a lot of people knew a lot of specifics about it. And so that was very intriguing to me. It was like, well, as I learned, like, wait, this is the first gay bar in the state of Vermont, and it was the only gay bar for the time, the 73 to 84, the only one in Vermont. And nobody knows about this, and nobody's talking about this. There's not a book about it. There's not a movie about it. It just blew my mind. And again, that it happened right here where I grew up too, it just kept drawing me in more and more and more. And the aspect of the story that this whole idea that something so important and so historic and so memorable can happen, and there's this sort of communal amnesia about it, was also kind of bizarre. So I wanted to understand why that was, and I began doing the research in bits and pieces, probably starting in 2016, but really hunkered down, like a lot of people with a lot of things during COVID, and started doing the research in earnest during lockdown, and doing a lot of the writing during lockdown, and then started reaching out to people to do interviews at that time too. And it's taken almost 4 years to, from when I started to actually put it all together, edit it, and come up with the final product. So. And as I said, it started out as 3, and then it was 4, and then it's 5, and then it was 6 episodes, just growing. And there's so much more to it. Just in the past few weeks, we've had a few events here in town for Pride Month, and I've met a few more people who used to go there, used to work there, who knew people who, used to go or work there. So there's this whole other pool of people that I would like to talk to, and talk and find out all the other things that I haven't even heard about yet about the inn. So I hope it's going to be an ongoing project that I add to over time as more people come forward and track them down. And if they agree to talk to me, that'd be great. Anybody else? Yes, Pat.
I think it's really good to document this because, people are passing away, and we've had some people suddenly pass away we weren't expecting to pass away recently. So it's really good to get this down from a historian standpoint, to get the word out.
Absolutely, and I think also that's sort of what kicked me into gear during COVID, because everything was. We sort of forget now, even this, just a few, maybe a year or so out, but it's very, like, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. We don't know who's going to be around in a few months and a few years. I mean, really it was to that point. And so that lit a fire, like, yeah, this should happen. And I wasn't the first person to do any of this research, I should say. That there's the group that we're fundraising for here with the gift basket that Pat wonderfully and Village Square Booksellers donated for us out in the open, and their Andrews Inn Oral History Project started this whole process probably 2015, 2016. And so that's some of the material that I used in the podcast itself, some of their interview material. I had their permission to use it. And they talked to a bunch of other people too, and for just that very reason that it's 40 years later, and we need to get these stories, these perspectives documented the best way we can, because the COVID was something that just brought that very much into focus for me and for a lot of people to really kick it into high gear and work hard on that. Anybody? Yes.
I just wanted to compliment you, Gail, on an earlier episode. Something I found tremendously moving was your extremely early childhood memory. Waking up from a nap and meeting a new neighbor.
Yeah.
And then from there, I learned about his life.
Yeah.
And mourned him. It left me in tears when I learned that he died of AIDS at the age of 36. And your entry into that story was so beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Profoundly moving.
Thank you. What she's referring to in the 5th episode. Again, we're talking, throwing around all these sorts of ideas about history and memories, and that's really what the podcast was at the base of that. How people interact with each other, and how we remember things, and how we preserve things, and what things become important to us, and why, and who tells what stories and why. And I had really, how many of us have, when we're 3 or 4, those are probably like the earliest memories that any of us have. And there's maybe 2 or 3 things that we can remember from that early on. And one thing that I clearly remember from probably 4-ish, I got up from a nap, and a neighbor from across the street had come over because there were rainbows. It was summertime, I think maybe, and there were rainbows, and he was all excited about the rainbows. And I could hear people talking, and I went outside, and there was our neighbor Jerry Glover, and he was talking to my mom, and my sisters maybe were there, but I was looking out, and he saw me, and he came over to the window and started talking to me, and I just have always remembered him. And I think that's probably the first and only time I ever saw him. I didn't really talk to him or anything, and he left, and then never really thought about it much after that. And over the years, we would periodically ask questions about him. And in the neighborhood, the story, eventually we found out that Jerry, he was a gay man. He came here and moved here, had a vacation house up across the road from where I grew up. He came to the inn. He knew all about Andrews Inn and loved it. And unfortunately, he died of AIDS. He was one of the first, and I ended up talking to his sister about it. She said he was one of the first 250 people to die of AIDS. He was living in New York City at the time. And so, of course, obviously, couldn't talk to him, but I did a very long interview with his sister, Sheila. And so she revealed the details about him, who he was as a person, and I thought that would be a really nice way to bring that part of the LGBTQ plus story into my story without hitting people over the head with it, and make it a human story, because all of them are human stories. And you get to know Jerry, and you get to know all about him and see what a fantastic, handsome, vibrant young man he was. And when he passes away, she gets to that part of the story. I always cry. I can't get through it even now. However many times I've listened to it in all the edits. Yeah, you can't not cry you just can't. It's everything we know about that now, comes to bear on that story. So thank you very much for that feedback. That's actually one of my favorite parts of the whole podcast that I got to do, was to work how to work that story into the podcast itself. And to be able to talk to people who would share memories like that with me. I have to say, I am blown away that anybody would talk to me. Not that there's anything wrong with me, but I'm just a schlub, and I sent her an email and like, hey, I was your brother's neighbor as a kid. You want to talk? I'm doing a podcast. You want to talk about him? And she said yes, and we talked a couple times, and it was like that pretty much with everybody that I wanted to interview and ask questions about. Everybody said yes, without really any reservation, and I'm still amazed by that. I'm not sure what it was, but or maybe people were just ready. It's something that we don't talk a lot about nowadays, and they were ready to share it with somebody else who would put it down and get it recorded. So I don't know if that had something to do with it, but anything else? Anybody want to jump up and comment? Yes.
I just wanted to say that I listened to the episodes yesterday and today, and I have an interest in the history because I know Jeremy and Tom, but everything else I learned was so beautiful and valuable, and I appreciated so much your ability to kind of hold the big question over the whole episode, and kind of dive into some of the more hard issues or societal issues, but frameworks, and I just wanted to thank you for that.
Wow, thank you for that. That was a part of the whole process that it took a long time to figure out how to do that, because I did, like I said in the beginning, Bellows Falls is a character in this story, and I think understanding the town in the 70s and 80s was going to be a crucial part of understanding how the inn happened in the 70s and 80s, of what led up to it and what happened, towards the end. And also what has happened since then. The fact that it isn't something that has, up until very recently, has been talked about and or even celebrated in the town. And there's a lot of, honestly, there's a lot of trauma in Bellows Falls, in a lot of towns like this. There's a lot of generational trauma. There's a lot of economic trauma. And again, those are aspects of our lives we don't generally talk about or try to work out. It's, it doesn't seem, a lot of that stuff isn't treated with, I think, the amount of respect that it should be. But you cannot discount the place where Bellows Falls was in the 70s, how, the mindset and just the whole aspect of what the downtown looked like, what it felt like, what it used to be. People are dealing with this idea of, we got to get back to that. We got to, that's the way, that's our salvation. That's the way we're gonna get back to the way things used to be. And of course, where have we heard that argument before and recently? Things were so much better, blah, blah, blah. And when you actually pick that argument apart, were they really that great? And who were they great for? And how long were they great for? And why were they great? Were they? And that's an aspect that definitely played out here, and it plays out everywhere. So again, it's one of those, I think one of the ideas that we use Bellows Falls in this story to talk about, but it's everywhere. You can sort of transplant that to most places and just plug in the specific details and have that same conversation or explore that idea. So something I've been thinking about a long time. And again, COVID obviously helped narrow that focus as well when everything else is going cuckoo crazy. Like, oh, why is it so crazy right now? Anything else? Okay, yes.
So I just wanted to thank you again, Gail. So I'm a recent arrival to the area, and I'm from California, and a lot of people that I know have asked me, why did you move out here? And I've had them listen to your podcast. And they know me as a history buff. They get it. They've heard your story of Bellows Falls, and they get why I moved out here. So thank you.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you.
Your podcast has given me like that cheat sheet. Just listen to this, I don't have to tell you.
Yeah, you got 7 hours. Here you go. You will totally understand. They may not be your friends anymore. Sorry, but we're your friends now, so you're okay. And anybody who has, put in it's almost 6 hours of listening. But luckily, you can shave off 45 minutes from today. But thank you for spending the time. I know people don't have a lot of time, and there's a lot of me giving a lecture through it, which isn't everyone's cup of tea. So I appreciate greatly anybody who has listened to the whole thing, and still will talk to me. All right, well, yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Alan and I moved here in '99 not knowing a soul. And as Flatlanders, we were accepted. And it's having all these other new people that came in, and Bellows Falls just embraces everybody.
Well, yeah.
Kind of different for other communities.
Mm-hmm. There's something, there is something special about Bellows Falls, and it's makes people, I think, when listening to Aline and Remy talk about, when they got here, like, oh, yeah, your eyes light up, you feel it, you want to be here. And for those of us who have lived here our whole lives and grown up, I've lived other places, but I came back and decided that, I wanted to actually learn more. Because it's funny when you live in a place, like they always say, when you visit someplace, people visit you and that's the only time you go do the thing that is in the place where you live. And this very similar when you grow up, I've never even bothered to learn about such and such or this or that, because it's right in front of your face the whole time. You don't even notice it. And a big part of this project was, I think, that coming at the research from that angle. Because I have memories of the signs outside the building, like, with the A. Oh yeah, I do remember that. I was very little, but I remember that. And so plugging that into the context that a 4-year-old doesn't have back in 1981 makes everything that has happened since then make so much more sense. And I have a better appreciation for all of it because of that. Yes?
Do you have a bigger next step or a broader vision for what might happen with this information?
At the moment, I don't. As I said before, I would love to talk and gather more stories from people and have it be an ongoing thing to just make sure that as much of the history has been recorded and documented as possible. And I don't have a have a bigger, larger plan for it at this point, but it'd be cool to just keep adding to it as far as I'm concerned. And maybe you'll get a book this big someday of just stories, and when we're hoping to find pictures and things that people hadn't thought about or looked at for all this time, and start to accumulate some of that, and maybe that would be something that we will have to, if it starts to become larger and larger, have to think about what we might want to do with it. But if anybody hasn't been out there yet, there is a historic marker outside the building of the Hotel Windham, which was just recently which was moved and reshuffled just this past week with the help of Elijah Zimmer. I know he was here. I don't know if there he is. He was part of the Pride Committee in Bellows Falls, but he really was the linchpin in making that happen, along with a number of town officials, the state historic preservation officer, and the town crews. It took a lot of people to make that happen. And for those of you who don't know, In 2019, 2020, the state put a historic marker, like those green plaques that you see at historic sites all across Vermont, and they put one up at the site of the Hotel Windham. And normally they don't commemorate anything that's less than 100 years old. But the state of Vermont wanted to start marking important LGBTQ plus history sites, and so Andrews Inn was a pretty obvious choice for them. But unfortunately, there was even, not that long ago, this is less than 5 years ago or 5 years ago, there was a little blowback from some of the town officials who had some reservations about, a gay sign being out by the building. And so they conceded and had the sign put up, but it was tucked away at the corner of the building where you honestly didn't know it was there. You couldn't see it. To actually read the panel that talked about Andrews Inn, you had to step around in a garden. It was ridiculous. And I think a lot of us had gotten to the point where we're not doing this anymore. No. And as part of we had the first Pride celebrations in Bellows Falls this year, 2023. And one of the things that got thrown out was like, wouldn't it be nice if we could get that sign moved? I mean, yeah, that would be really nice. And Elijah got on it, and he doesn't want to take the credit, but he really was instrumental in making that happen. So this past Wednesday, the town crews have moved the sign. They turned it around, so it's still on the side of the building, but it's much closer to the road. You can actually see it when you walk by. And the Andrews Inn panel is actually turned out towards the street, so that's the side that you read. And it was pretty fantastic. And he doesn't want us to clap for it, but let's clap for it. He deserves it. And it was beautiful right there below at the corner of the old Hotel Windham with the giant rainbow banner flying right across it above its head. It was just the gayest thing I've ever seen. It was awesome. All right, well, if there's any... Oh, yes.
Thank you, Susan Stamberg, for your excellent storytelling. Thank you again.
Thank you, guys. And Pat, if you want to come up and pull a name, we got the raffle.
Does anyone else want to?
Yeah, we can. You want to throw a few bucks in, get your name in last minute for this beautiful. We got some. It's a cookie making little.
I think it's a book, and then there's a little kit with cookie making, and an apron is here.
There's an apron there. Yeah,
There's a bowl that was actually donated by Windham.
Oh, thank you guys. I didn't know that. So basically, it's an afternoon party in a box.
Yes. And it just happened that I read an email and they said that they had this little package. And was I interested? And I said, perfect.
So again, Pat is from Village Square Booksellers, and this was donated by Simon & Schuster, the majority of the material in there. And yeah, it was really, really sweet and kind of them to donate it to this so that we could raise money. All the money raised for the raffle goes directly to Out in the Open, which is a social nonprofit down in Brattleboro, Vermont, that supports rural LGBTQ plus people, connects them, gets them help if they need it, and creates community for rural LGBTQ plus people. So it's a very worthy cause.
So let's see, what do we have? I got to put this down.
And gorgeously appointed by John Madura, I have to say.
Yes.
Very nice.
Who does wonderful windows over
She didn't want to do it? Did you want to pull?
Sure. All right.
Raina Williams, there you go. And we don't have to really worry about nepotism here because we all know each other and it would be impossible to not be a little nepotistic. So I think that totally counts. So excellent.
Linger, talk to each other, group hug.
Yes, Mark said that they will be picking things up, but people are welcome to stay and chat if they'd like to. You are welcome to help yourself to some food that's still out if you got to use the bathroom. there you go. But yeah, we'll hang out and chat. Anybody who wants to talk about anything or just hang out and be happy about something nice that happened today, that's nice too. So thank you guys so much.